fight anymore. Just turn around and leave me. The tear in my eye drops on the floor alongside my speed.
So, after taking about 2 to 3 months off the gym entirely, it appears my body weight is around 189.8 pounds with my body fat around 12.9%. And if you guys want to see my other metrics, you could just pause here and check it out. But for those of you who are wondering what kind of voodoo magic this is, having your scale hooked up to your phone like this, it's actually this new scale by this company called Vanity Planet. And if you guys have been following me for some time now, you'll see my videos back in high school when I actually got one of their first scales sent to me, like one of the very, very old ones. I think it was the first one they've ever made. And that was just a very standard basic scale, you know, your body weight, your body fat percentage, water weight, and maybe your bone mass. So like 2 to 3 things that are really measured aside from your weight. And since then, they've like massively upgraded to this scale that measures like 10 plus things. Then you can connect it to your phone with Bluetooth and you can see everything. It's all neat and it saves it and it tracks it. It's just way, way, way more elegant. But something a lot of people like to say about scales like this that measure things that aren't solely your body weight is that all the other measurements aren't really that accurate. And the thing I have to say to that is, believe it or not, it doesn't actually matter, because think about it this way. Imagine by some magical means you were able to figure out exactly what all your measurements were, your body fat, your bone mass, just whatever you want, right, down to like the 100th decimal, just razor precise, and you had all your measurements. Then what? Like, what do you, there's really nothing you could do with that information, because at the end of the day, the only thing that matters is how you look and how you feel. But the only time that, you know, numbers like that or measurements can become useful is if you have multiple numbers, multiple measurements over a period of time. Then you could actually track your progress consistently, because even if the scale is slightly off with some things, it's consistently slightly off by the same amount. So therefore, your measurements are going to be consistent. So with that being said, if you guys want to pick up this new and improved scale, I managed to get you a 60% off discount code. So use the first link in the description and code DL58 at checkout to save 60% off on this high-tech scale. Quick update with Euphoria. As of today, I restocked the stim version of Euphoria. So by the time this video is out, I don't know if there's going to be any left in stock. But if there isn't any left in stock, there's going to be another massive restock, the biggest one yet, happening in the following week. So you guys will definitely be able to pick up a tub by then. Also working on new flavors and working on getting Euphoria to ship to countries that it can't ship for the time being due to just these weird reasons, but I'm trying to overcome that. Also, I'm going to do a quick giveaway for Euphoria 2.0. So if you guys want to enter, the way this game is going to work is in the comments section below. Tag your Instagram handle along with your favorite synonym to the word Euphoria, and I'll pick someone randomly. I'll pick like 2 to 3 people, and I'll send you guys a tub of either stim or non-stim, whichever one you want. So I've taken about 2 to 3 months off the gym entirely, and the reason for that is because through my consultations with Stu McGill, he's helped me realize that if I continue on weightlifting, at least for the time being, it's going to tremendously delay the recovery of my back. And my previous logic was basically, how I would conduct myself is I'd get up to the point where my back's like 70, 80% flared up. It's just in horrible pain. And then I would back off. And what I mean by back off is maybe avoid squatting, deadlifting, things that really put excess stress and pressure on the lower back, until I'd get to the point where I'm maybe 10 to 20% in pain, where the pain's still there, but it's a lot more tolerable. And then once I get to that point, I get all excited again. Oh, I'm going to get back into it with the whole, deadlifting or squatting just a little bit. Then I flare myself back up to like 80%. It's a constant up and down. So for me, what I need to do is I need to desensitize my back pain to 0, like wind it down completely. And I'm just not going to be able to do that if I continue my normal weightlifting protocol. So just because I can't do my normal weightlifting protocol doesn't mean that I'm just lying around there, just waiting to heal. There's lots of things that we're doing, things like strengthening my core. My spine hygiene has been phenomenal. Just anytime that I'm sitting, my back is perfectly straight. I have a whole routine of how if I need to lay down on the floor, how do I get up from that? Just day-to-day tasks when I'm moving. My spine is in as neutral of a position as possible, and I'm avoiding any acute little micro injuries or acute little assaults that I could get on my spine throughout the day. That's helped tremendously. Obviously, things like building my core, doing the big three, which you guys saw, maybe I posted an Instagram picture, or in the beginning of this video, you saw me do those three movements. I've been doing that several times a day. A new thing that I've recently incorporated is walking up a hill backwards and then walking back down. That has unique muscle firing patterns it's going to be optimal for me. And now I'm getting to the point where I'm decently desensitized. So my previous self would have just immediately gone back into weightlifting excited, and I would, of course, flare up the pain again. But instead of doing that, even though I am relatively desensitized at the moment, I'm basically doing subtle, gentle nerve flossing techniques, just getting the nerves in my back, just moving again, grooving, finding their own path, and while still building more core stiffness and stability. So just something that I realized is that this is going to be potentially a long and tedious process, but there's really no way around it. So for me, my logic is, okay, I either, suck it up, not train the way that I really like to for the time being, and fully, get over this back issue by recovering nice and slowly, as opposed to just making it be worse and worse and worse and worse and just having debilitating back pain just every single day. So I've decided that I actually want to tackle this issue. So if you want to know more about my specific protocol to recover and exactly what happened to my spine from consulting Stu McGill and having him look at my scans and do a whole 3-hour consultation with my back and just all spine things, how the spine works, why do we have one, how do they commonly get injured, what's the general rehabilitation pattern, and just a cool bunch of fun facts about the spine and a whole bunch of other stuff. You'll definitely enjoy this podcast that I filmed with Stu McGill, which is coming up right now. So hope you guys enjoy. So today I have my friend Stu McGill on the podcast. And for those of you who've been following me for some time now, you'll know that I've been struggling with some back issues for many, many years now. I injured it, when I was very, very young, and there's been chronic re-injuries ever since. And I've tried so many different things to get it to feel better, different massages, even injections in that area, suboptimal rehab protocols and stuff. And none of it really worked, especially for, a sustained long period of time. So after doing some research, I came across Stu McGill. He was it's basically, people have said that if you could ask God what's wrong with your lower back, not even God could give you as good of an answer as Stu McGill. So Stu McGill is literally the guy when it comes to all things spine related. So just one of the first things I wanted to ask you is, how did you, briefly, how did you get into working on the spine and becoming so, an expert at it?
First, Dave, I hope one day we'll meet and you'll meet my wife, and she will tell you I'm as far from godlike as you can possibly get. Anyway, I'll teach you some of my bad habits and you'll change your mind. But anyway, well, when I was doing my PhD in spine biomechanics, the natural progression is to become a professor, which I did do, and I had a laboratory, and I started out asking one very simple question: how does the spine work? And you'll be surprised that not too many people can give you an idea of how this stack of vertebrae with a pile of discs and nerves and muscles and whatnot actually accomplishes all that it does, and it allows us to do what it does. And young professors get asked to go to orthopedic meetings and neurology meetings and give presentations of what they've discovered, and I would do that, and the medics would say, well, that's interesting what you've just found out and showed us. We have a very difficult patient where I think that might help us. Would you come and see the patient with us? So I wasn't trained as a medic, and but I found that when I would go and see patients with them, I saw pain from a very, very different point of view. It was more from an engineering point of view. I would probe the person. I would ask them questions looking for patterns, because in our laboratories, we would get real people in pain and measure their muscle reactions and the loads on different body parts and how it created pain or took pain away. And we would take cadaveric spines and apply some of these offensive loads and see what happened to the spine. And then we would do experiments on groups of the military, police officers, firefighters. We did groups of MMA fighters, gymnasts, hockey players, basketballers, etc., putting together our findings to create an understanding of how the back worked. And then along all of that, we would, as our understanding of how things worked grew, we would try and create tests that we could perform that would reveal why that person is pain. What's the mechanism of their pain? And you experienced some of that when I assessed you, and we were very specifically going through specific motions, activities, postures, loads, directions, etc., that triggered your pain. And you will recall that every time we created pain, we tried to create an antidote strategy for you to take your pain away. And you were very successful at doing that. You were easy to coach. We would migrate your stress from something that was causing pain to something else just by changing your posture. And then we would add different muscle activation patterns, etc. So that gave us an outline of what you should stop doing. And then the counter to that is what you should do. And I'll just finish that up by saying it was interesting in your introduction, you used the word chronic pain. And you have had pain for a lot of years. But I will debate anyone in that you have chronic pain. You didn't. I would submit that you had many acute attacks over and over and over again by doing certain things, violating the laws of Mother Nature and keeping yourself painful, such that when we stop those many acute insults and replace them with activities that work with nature to rebuild the tissues and cause them to adapt, the pain went away. And you can react to that now.
I see. One of the things that I've heard you talk about a lot is the whole topic of non-specific back pain. So to my understanding, how you just laid it out, you were essentially just hell-bent on figuring out exactly how the spine works. And through an enormous amount of research, you were able to get such a deep and fundamental understanding of how the spine works. So now you're at the point in expertise within yourself and with, you know, people that you've coached to be able to make really good assessments, that you could figure out precisely what's going on with someone's back, right? So I'm assuming that prior to you doing a lot of research into the spine, before, you know, you got into the field, the back wasn't really understood nearly as well. And because of that, when people would have back problems and back pain and they would go to their doctors, the doctors oftentimes just had very cookie cutter, blanket, generalized things to tell their patients, right? Oh, go do some generic rehab routine, do some physical therapy, stretch your hamstrings, hang upside down, get a massage, things like that. And then if none of those things worked, I'm assuming that they were just diagnosed as having non-specific back pain. And is the reason for that, because one of the things I've heard you talk about before, there's no such thing as non-specific shoulder pain, non-specific thumb pain. It's very, very specific. So what is it about the back that would cause many professionals, many doctors to just write it off as, oh, it's just non-specific pain? Is it because the spine is just ridiculously complex, or we just haven't done, you know, a sufficient amount of research on it until you came along?
Well, I have two prevailing thoughts going through my mind as I listened to your stream of logic. And the first one is as you pointed out, docs don't deal with non-specific head pain or non-specific leg pain. They do an assessment to figure out what the mechanism is. Why this doesn't occur with back pain is, if you look at the training in the worldwide healthcare system, very few get training in how to assess a back. In the US, for example, docs perform medical services that form billing codes, and the billing codes are submitted to insurance companies and they're reimbursed. There is no code to assess back pain. So when I started our experimental clinic, I didn't follow the medical model. What I said is, how can I create an assessment and a system that will help the patient understand what their pain is, so we know what tool or approach to use that matches their specific pain mechanism. And some people do well with mobility approaches. Other people do well with stability approaches. Other people do well with becoming more fit. Some are so hell-bent on getting fit, that's the reason why they have back pain, and they have to back off a little bit. So my point in all of this is, until you understand the mechanism of pain and can match it with a specific approach, it's just dumb luck. You go to a medic and they will give you the thing that they're trained to do and can bill for, whether or not that suited you. So it's dumb luck. We didn't want to do that. So I said, what we're going to do is set aside 2 hours to see a patient, and we're going to bill for time, and we will converge on an assessment. And by the end of that, we will know precisely what activities are causing their pain and what activities take their pain away, what motions, postures, loads. And then we can do specific tissue tests to figure out, well, it's that right L4 facet joint that's causing the pain, or they've got a posterior lateral disc bulge on the left side at L3 hanging up the femoral nerve root, it's causing left thigh pain, etc., etc. So when we can get to that level, we know what to do. Do you know, after the first year of running that experimental clinic, we turned our appointments into 3 hours, unheard of in the traditional system. So that's how I would start that idea that there is no non-specific back pain in our world, and our job is to figure out what will help this particular individual who's sitting in front of us. But the second thing, where my mind was going as you were speaking, think of smoking. Let's go back to the 50s. You know, for years, the tobacco companies denied any link with cancer. And rightly so in many ways. They would say, well, you know, I've smoked till I was 80. I didn't get cancer, didn't cause cancer in me. But on average, it will. And back pain is somewhat the same for a fellow like yourself, who is a warrior, very admirable. You wanted high performance, you were training it. I get it, because, you know, David, you and I are not that far apart. Very, very similar in our history and our passion for pushing it and having a little bit of fun. But you can smoke for 20 years and have no real ill effect. In other words, the cancer comes much later after the exposure. And so it was in your case and in many young fellows. They build up cumulative trauma, which should stimulate adaptation in your body and make you stronger, which it did, but not all the parts in your body. The cumulative trauma grew faster than the rate at which your body was able to repair it. And then you had to pay the price. So my point is, much like smoking, there was a delayed effect. Now look at the science that was required to conclusively prove that smoking caused cancer in most people who smoked. And so it was with excessive exercise, because the problems didn't occur till much later. And so people could say, oh, well, doing that didn't cause my back injury. Well, hold on. We documented the cumulative trauma over the years, and then we did epidemiological studies, just like they did with smoking, and put the links together slowly. So the third little bit too, and I'll stop talking, I've gone way too long on this, but biology has a tipping point. Unlike smoking, well, maybe some people could argue and say a little bit of smoking is good for you, but don't cross the limit. But I can tell you, the things that adapt your body and make you stronger is physical stress and loading. Having no stress, you will be very weak and sick.
Fragile.
But if you have too much physical stress and load, it will break you down. So we have a tipping point. We want to stress our bodies and get strong and robust, but we can't cross the tipping point into injury. So there's the third little element to keep working with Mother Nature, keep the adaptations going to build strength and resilience. And the nice thing is, if you get cancer from smoking and you don't get treatment, chances are your future isn't very good. But now we take young fellas who stress themselves, they cross the tipping point. The good news is they get a second chance. Unlike smoking, they now can desensitize the pain and rebuild their bodies and work with the damage to build it all back up again, readapt it, and have another chance for a robust, very enjoyable life. But anyway, I've spoken too much now,
Yeah,
but there's a little bit of a thought on that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The analogy with the smoking is very, very accurate, aside from the caveat that unlike smoking, you actually can get a second chance if you do, the correct things to build yourself back up again. And that other concept you touched on, like that biological tipping point, it's a huge, huge, huge concept, like a very important idea. And I feel like for any athlete, it's so important to be able to have, the calibrated intuition to know exactly where that is and almost treat it like an art and just romance it just the right amount, get really close to the edge, but then allow yourself to recover. Just the issue with younger athletes, and me specifically when I was younger, I'm so guilty of this. And I'm sure a lot of the people that follow me are, especially the younger individuals heavily have this mindset, is that just the warrior, push through it, push through it, push through it, push through it. And I remember like when I was younger, when I'd have like little tweaks, twinges, pains or whatever, for whatever reason, I was just under the idea of, oh, I could just muscle it out of my body. I could just work it super hard. I'll just get over it. Either like I'll toughen up and endure it, or it'll just naturally go away with time. And then I was under this delusional idea that, yeah, it would just somehow just magically just disappear with time because I'm a tough guy and I could just make it disappear. And then me and many others that have gotten older and accumulated lots of injuries have come to the rude awakening that that's just simply not how it works. And I think you phrased it in a really good way, saying that, biology, like it has a price. If you over tip on the tipping point and you exceed your recovery capacity and do that for a long enough period of time, you are going to accumulate so much damage. And it's so easy to do that, specifically when you're young, when your body's fresh and you just have so much energy, right? So I would just encourage so many people to, while they're younger, just really, really, really back off. But it's just so difficult because so many people will like hear me say this and hear many other people say this, but they won't actually care about it or think about it until they get injured themselves. And an interesting thought I had the other day, I was curious about your idea on this. What if someone did this? What if someone that was beginning weightlifting, right? Before they even started whatsoever, they got a fresh scan of their back. So they saw what it looked like. And then maybe every 6 months or so, or every year, they got another scan just to compare and see what's going on. Because a lot of the cumulative micro trauma you can't necessarily just feel it in your body until it builds up to the point where you do feel it. So would that maybe be a good idea, just thinking off the cuff, to just get regular scans just to see what's going on? I'm just curious, like, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I have a couple of thoughts. We've already done that, believe it or not. So we've done it through what's called cross-sectional studies, where we will take some young players in a sport and look at their MRIs, and then we will look at people who are 5 years in the sport and have made a certain level of proficiency. And then we follow them all the way through. We did one a little while ago. Do you remember when the NHL hockey players went on strike? The young ones went to Europe to keep playing, make a bit of money. The older ones took that year off and healed their bodies. I saw quite a number of them for back issues. They came with 20 years of MRIs. And every year I knew how many games they played, how many games they couldn't play in because of back injury. I knew how many goals they scored. So I had health markers, pain markers, performance markers. I had the MRIs every year, and I also had their training schedule for those 20 years. And so I would see, they were hanging on, doing well, and then they got in with a trainer who that year, without ever assessing them, said, you should do ass-to-grass deep squats. And then the next year they came in with a bone bruise in their vertebra and a bulging disc, and they were doing quite well up until that point. Now, when was the last time you saw an NHL hockey player do an ass-to-grass squat on the ice?
Never.
Never. Anyway, and then we've also got individuals as well. So in a way, we've done those sorts of MRI studies. However, the point I want to caution on is, you said, well, if you're a young athlete, have your body scanned now and then continue on. And there's a bit of a problem with that, because the scans won't tell the truth. Unless you already have symptoms, because there are some people who have very odd looking features on scans that never cause any issue at all. So to be able to interpret the scan, you need to thoroughly assess the person. And it really helps if they have pain, because from the character of the pain, you then know what to look for on the scan. So I wouldn't recommend doing routine scans. What I would recommend, though, is let's take a page out of the book of some of the European super soccer clubs who have really led the way in this idea of, I think, lifelong injury prevention, which is what you're getting to here. So if you take a team like AC Milan, for example, well known for every 2 or 3 weeks, they completely assess those players. They're worth a lot of money, and they want to keep them performing well on the field. They do neurological tests, mechanical tests, physiological tests, psychological tests. And for example, I'll give you one. If a player is going through a divorce or something with their girlfriend, their chance of injury goes up for that period of time. So there is a time for, are you sleeping well? Can we change your nutritional routine? Tweak the body a little bit. Let's do some power tests and vertical jumps and those kinds of things, and see if it's affecting that. Are you overtrained? Is it time to back off a little bit? So with some of our players and youngsters as well, we will devise a assessment program similar to that is relevant to their age, their injury history, their particular sport, and keep them tuned. Now, what do you see on the internet? Oh, I set a personal best this week in deadlift. Guess what? Next week, I'm going for another personal best. It doesn't work that way in biology, I'm afraid. If you set a personal best in something like a deadlift, that was very taxing for your body. Now it's time to restore. Deload for a couple of weeks. Let the neurology cool down and then build it all back up again. And, you know, the evidence we can offer there is look at some of the great lifters like Ed Cohn, the GOAT, the greatest of all time power lifter. Ed would set 1 or 2 records a year, and he was wise enough not to get more greedy than that. And then he'd cycle down, deload, and build it all back up again and set yet another personal record. And the other evidence I can offer there is you take a guy like Brian Carroll. When he came to see me the first time, 2013, very disabled with pain. Well, here was a guy who had already had 2 world squat records in 2 different weight categories, but could hardly get on and off the floor. He was in such pain, but with a bit of science and bringing him back slowly, romancing the biology, you know what happened. He came back for a year. He did the same kinds of routines that you're currently doing now. Then he was able to transition into restressing this new biological structure he had adapted, and came back and set a personal best, and then the all-time all-weight category world record in squat. He squatted 1,306 pounds, which is so. When you're in the room with a human that does something like that, it is, you know, we overuse the word awesome, but it is a most awesome. You know, it's like a rocket taking off. But anyway, again, I'm sorry I rambled on that one,
You're
but I
fine.
hope
You're fine.
that essay gives a little bit of context to all of this.
Yeah. So one of the overarching points that I'm picking up here when it comes to recovery and just training in general is precision and treating yourself as a hyper unique individual, and discarding and throwing out all cookie cutter things, all generalized recommendations. And I think that's part of the reason that you became such an expert, is because you genuinely had a true curiosity to know exactly what's going on. And when you see all your patients, you take whatever amount of time is necessary to figure out exactly what is going on with them specifically. So with that being said, with your expertise, if you could you explain, just in the most general sense, what is the spine? Why do we have it? How does it work? And what are the most common circumstances or common injuries that occur to the spine, and why they happen?
I've written books.
I'm sure
There was a television show being produced in the UK, and the theme of the show was, if you could re-engineer the body, could you make it better? And they went to a knee expert and a cardiovascular expert and a brain neurologist, and I was this spine guy. And I didn't see the show at the end, but I heard the conclusion of every expert was, when they thought about it and considered all of the alternatives, they couldn't come up with a better design. So I'm going to start that thought with that concept. The spine is pretty perfect for what it can do. May I use some physical models to demonstrate some of these things, Dave?
Please.
Okay. So here is a spine and pelvis, which is a collection of blocks of bone, the vertebra, and they have discs that are not ball and socket joints. Like at the hip, there's a ball and socket joint, which is designed to create power. Large forces through a large range of motion to create power. But this isn't a power producing joint. It's a very, very special joint. Why didn't we evolve ball and socket joints in the spine? Instead, we have discs. The reason is this is a flexible spine that allows us to dance and have sex and tie our shoes, all these good, necessary things. But it also allows me to pick up a small child out of a crib. It allows me, in the 200 or 300 years ago, I would have to go and shoot my meat and pick it up and drag it and carry it home. So a flexible rod, if we loaded it with compression, it will bend and buckle very quickly. So this is called an osteoligamentous spine. You need guy wires to give it the ability to bear load. So I can show a few engineering models now. This is basically a articulated linkage like our body. There's the spine. It's got stiffness to it. There's a wire rod all the way up the middle holding these balls and the blocks representing the vertebra. Now I'm going to let some of the stiffness and compression out by taking the lever off, and you'll see it bends and buckles and collapses very quickly. So you need a guy wire system to allow your spine to move from a flexible structure to a structure where I can now pick up an object, deadlift, overhead press, throw, turn, kick, punch, survive. Well, that's quite an array of tasks. Now the next concept, proximal stiffness. We live in a linkage. If I wanted to push very robustly and I could develop a huge shoulder pushing mechanism by doing bench press, look what happens. The bench press muscle, the pec major, spans my shoulder joint. Distal to the shoulder joint, that bench press muscle creates the athletic push, what I wanted to do. But proximal to the shoulder joint, it connects to the rib cage, and it just bends the rib cage into collapse. So if all I had was a bench press muscle standing and I wanted to push, all I do is collapse. It's called an energy leak from an engineering point of view. But if I locked my core, now 100% of that athletic effect of that muscle is positive. It's what we want. So whatever I do in life, I have to have proximal stiffness to allow me to push, pull, kick, lift, throw, run, etc. The mother of all proximal stiffness and stability in an articulated linkage is between your shoulders and your hips. Now, isn't it curious that the spine has a ball and socket at either end? The power producing to allow you to push power through this flexible rod that is now stiffened, and it allows me to do all of those things. So the guy wire system, this is why we work on our core muscles to allow us to lift more, throw more, run faster, etc. The final little bit to this is joint injury is characterized by a loss of stiffness. So assume I tore my knee ligaments. The doc would do a drawer test and measure the shear instability of your knee, indicating a torn or a damaged knee ligament. Loss of stiffness is the indicator of knee instability, and quite often it will be associated with a pain trigger. Now, remember the disc. It is a ring of collagen fibers with a nucleus in the middle that forms a gel. It's an incompressible hydraulic fluid. Consider letting some air out of your front left car tire. It will bulge on the road and the car will be sloppy to drive. You lose control of the car. Car's sloppy. If we let a little air or hydraulic pressure out of the disc, and this is what you did through overloading of compression, by the way, at L4, this joint is normal, and so is yours. Your L5 is normal, but at L4, the end plate has been damaged. It can't contain the hydraulic pressure. It's lost its stiffness. Watch what happens. I'm going to apply a general torque, and you see how the majority of the motion occurs at the joint that lost its stiffness. Those micro movements trigger pain. So when we did the orthopedic testing of you, testing and applying even a kilo of shear load to that joint, you remember the pain you experienced. 1 kilo. That was the loss of stiffness. You had other ones at different levels of your spine that we found very quickly. But the beauty of this was immediately we were able to create a muscular pattern. I said, push your fingers in, now push them out. And now we're going to probe the same pain provocative load, and your pain was almost eliminated. So we were able to converge on an antidote. And then I knew, now we need to train this in your training program. And you've been on that program for what, 5 or 6 weeks now, and you've been able to desensitize your pain. So there's several cool things there that I can summarize, I suppose. More to all of this is, why don't we have ball and socket joints down our spine? We could whiplash and produce more power in our spine, I suppose. But consider this is a whale's spine, and it drives the massive fluke that drives it through the water. Very, very powerful. They do have some cartilaginous fibers holding the joints together, but they have ball and socket joints. There's the ball on one side and the socket that we see on the other. But look at the whale. It doesn't have to support load in a deadlift. The ocean supports its body. Now, if you took it out on land under gravity, it wouldn't be as robust. But in water, it's a wonderful thing to adapt. But if you had ball and socket joints, you would need a massive amount of musculature around your torso. You'd be so wide you couldn't move. So going back to that TV show, you can see why every single one of us as a group of scientists were able to say evolution is perfect. It created the most robust, the most resilient human body possible. But it has to live within a certain set of rules. And those rules have come from evolution. We've already discussed the tipping point, and there's some of the rules of adaptation. And you did mention prior to this question, you were saying, don't do too much. I'm warning all the young fellas. I think we have a bigger problem in our modern society of people not doing enough. Now, they're not warriors like you, but they're the polar opposites who spend far too long on their computers de-evolving their bodies into things that are so weak, easy to kill, really. There are the extremes, and we're trying to seek that middle of the road where you're as tough and resilient and as hard to kill as you possibly can, whether it's a virus, whether it is a stress of your environment through some sort of uncontrollable situation, or there are times when you are going to have to fight for your life. You might have to escape a burning building. You might have to get out of a car wreck. You might have to, you might be attacked by bad people. For all of these reasons, being more robust and easier to kill is a good thing. And I happen to believe it's a personal responsibility as well, but that's just my own opinion. But anyway, there's a little bit of an essay, I suppose, on basic mechanics of the spine and how wonderful it truly is. But we have to learn to live within the rules that are dictated.
Yeah, whoever designed us clearly did a phenomenal job, because we are quite eloquently built, though some more robust than others, it seems, and then maybe some are given certain bodies and a little too much of ambition and they get little snapped up spines like me. But
no, hold on. I'm not letting that rest. You know that. You had to pay a little bit of tuition. So now it's time. You've paid and you're going to continue to pay. And do you think your parents, myself, and everyone else got through life without paying tuition. That's what life is.
That's true.
So you will continue to get wise, and you get smart too late, and uh, it's just it's that's life.
It is what
but,
it is.
but
That's true.
it is what it is. But you will get your robustness back.
No, I'll definitely get it back. It'll just take some time. I was gonna ask you earlier, like, what are the most common ways that the spine gets injured? But I kind of want to narrow that question a little bit more specifically to the people that are more than likely going to be watching this. What are the most common injuries and common ways that the spine gets injured for people that are weightlifters, that are power lifters? Because for people like us, unless we're escaping a burning building, right? We're more than likely going to get injured inside the gym as opposed to outside of the gym. So in like a weightlifting context, what are the most common ways people get injured? And like how later on I want to talk about how exactly I got injured and what you were able to diagnose in me specifically.
All right. Let's do some pattern recognition. So as people come in here, and no one gets back pain and say, oh, I'm going to go to see McGill or BackFit Pro because I've got some back pain. We're the end of the road. We've already, that person has already seen 10 different clinicians. They've had 10 different procedures done on them, and they haven't gotten better. They may even be worse. So those are the kinds of people that we see. If I do pattern recognition on those, and you've already given me a pattern, they're younger, they're weight training, and they've got disabling back pain. Most of them will have damaged the discs to the point that they've created pain. Now, the pain that they create may have different pathways, but basically, they've delaminated the collagen. In other words, they're under too much load and having too much mobility. That's pretty much it. So heavy deadlifts with poor form. Now, there are some people who will argue with me and say, well, I've lifted round back my whole life and my back is fine. Yes, you were the one who smoked for 30 years and never got cancer. These things happen, but most of the people will not be so lucky. So the better form you have, ultimately you will build more capacity in your body and reach higher levels of performance for most people. That's the average of the laws, so to speak. So that would be probably the number one injury. Now, in your case, your disc annulus damage was minimal. You don't have big disc bulges. What happened to you was cumulative trauma of the end plates of the disc. You must have had some fantastic compressive loads, and you had a few multiple compressive fractures that, I'll tell you, David, every grand old man and grand old woman of powerlifting, and I've seen an awful lot of them, every single one of them has those fractures that you had. But think of their training routines. They would create microfracturing of the end plate, and then they only trained heavy deads or heavy squats once a week. Now think of what you and your friends did. So you kept building those microfractures until they became macrofractures. But when I look at the end plates of the grand old men and the grand old women, they have sclerotic bone. When you break or microfracture a bone, you get a little bit of a crack, and then a callus forms over that fracture. And that callus is stronger than the virgin native bone. So that little microfracture was an adaptation. It built back stronger, but it takes time. So when you get a microfracture, materials that build bone are free floating in solution in your body. Magnesium ions, calcium ions, the things that build bone, they are ions and they chemically bond to the fracture site. The fracture site gets a piezoelectric charge that attracts these callousing ions. But if you go and load it again in 2 or 3 days, the callus breaks off. So you're right back to zero again, and now you add more to the crack. So the idea, and this, by the way, my education came from studying the research in turkey wings. They were trying to figure out, this was paid by NASA, your space agency. How can we keep astronauts strong in space who don't have gravity to keep loading them? How can we create loads on their body so the mineral doesn't leave their body? We have to stress them. And they would do these experiments on turkey wings, and they would bend them, and they would find, well, is it compression that keeps the bone healthy? Is it shear? Is it when you bend, one surface goes into tension, the other goes into compression? It turns out it was acceleration. It was these kinds of little micro impacts that, so, to go for a little bit of a jog, or don't wear the impact absorbing shoes, wear sharper heels, get little more impacts, as one example. But anyway, going back to the bone callousing natural training regimen of the grand old men and grand old women. Think back to Ed Cohn, as I described earlier. It was slow and steady. They create little invisible microfractures. They train heavy once a week, and then every 4 or 5 weeks, they have a week of deload. Now, did you do that? No. Did I do
Most
that when I
certainly
was
not.
younger? I most certainly did not either. I did not know about it. I was a warrior, and with my friends, we were going to lift heavy weights and egg each other on to have another personal best. That's what we did. A lot of us paid for it. It's called tuition. But anyway, there's a little bit of a thought on the most common injuries. Most of them are to the annulus of the disc, but yours was not. Yours was to the end plate from compression.
When you say annulus of the disc, does that mean like the circumference, like right around it?
Yes. Yeah.
So
So that comes with being in deviated postures, allowing the spine to flex and extend under heavy load. Now, the contrast to that is you can be a belly dancer. We did a study on Middle Eastern belly dancers. None of them had back pain, but they didn't lift heavy. So do you see, if you have a lot of mobility that you build into your spine, that's fine. You can be a belly dancer, do yoga and all these kinds of things. And chances are you're not really at risk. But when you combine the two, get out of position, then put heavy load in, things adapt, not in a positive way.
So annular damage or bulging disc type of damage, you're saying that's more often than not caused when your spine is in contorted flex positions under load, because that creates that uneven pressure for a disc to pop out. And
Correct. Do you want to see a model of it, how it
yeah, let's
works?
see it.
Okay, so in the middle of the disc, you have a gel, and these are collagen fibers held together with a ground substance. I'm going to get one more model that will show the story here. And it's actually a piece of the glass cloth they use in fiberglass. This is a fabric. Your disc annulus is a fabric. So if I want to put a hole in my very nice Alico sponsored lifting jacket here, I would create stress strain reversals back and forth, and the fiber weave would delaminate and tear. Agreed?
Yeah.
Okay, so there is a piece of fiberglass material, right? You see the weave in it. Now I'm going to create stress strain reversals. And now do you see the delaminations in the fibers? So these fibers are held together with a ground substance. I'm going to keep bending them back and forth under load, and I might do deadlifts or squats with butt wink. Now, some people say butt wink is okay. Maybe they're the smokers who got to smoke for a few years without getting it, but eventually they're going to get less lucky and less lucky. But anyway, if I keep bending, I get some looseness in those fibers. They start to delaminate. But here's the thing, that nucleus if you're going to pick up a 400-pound deadlift, you create tremendous pressure inside that. We would measure these pressures. Now I'm going to bend the disc forward. And do you see the little delamination, that red mark in the back? I'm going to bend the disc forward and squeeze it. Did you see the delamination open up?
Yeah.
There's the disc bulge. Now, this is the cool thing. What's the antidote? Don't bend forward and squeeze the spine. Nothing comes out. Do you see how that locks it in? The disc bulges generally, but nothing comes out. And then some people will say, oh, well, you can't deadlift without flexing your spine. Yeah, we've measured it. And do you think right now, if I was to take just a dowel here as an example, we can lock the spine, I can go down and play shortstop squat, pull the hips through, there's zero spine motion there. Now I can put a bar there, repeat that, lock it in, start to bend the bar, engage the lats, pull the hips through, drag the bar up my thighs, up my shins and then thighs. Can I do that without moving the spine? Yes. Then someone will say, well, what about Atlas stone lifting with the strong men? I did a podcast, you know Martin Licious, who's the current world's strongest man? Well, he is. And yeah, and I did a podcast about a month ago with Bill Kazmaier, former world's strongest man. In any case, I've measured, I think that I'm the only person in the world who's actually measured how strong men pick up an Atlas stone. And an Atlas stone, they can weigh up to 400 pounds. And they get the stone straddled on the ground, and then they flex their spine around the whole stone. But what people don't realize is they don't move their backs. Once they grab the stone and hook into it, the stone and their spine become one. And it's the movement that causes the delamination. So if I can hook around a stone and don't move the spine under those tremendous compressive loads, then you'll see they roll it and they thrust their hips forward. And then that momentum allows the stone to roll up their spine just a little bit. Now the stone is over their hips. They've just unloaded their back, you see. This is called the hoik, and then they place the stone on the platform for a successful lift. So there's a tremendous amount of skill, momentum transfer, etc., for a good stone lift. And a world-class stone lifter lifts a stone that's about half the weight of their personal best deadlift. So, you know, there's a lot of nuances going on with all of this. But there's, again, another technique. If you are out of position and your spine has to take a lot of load, don't move your spine until the load is put down. Did you see there's, again, several layers that Mother Nature puts on this, that if you follow, you can keep yourself a little bit more resilient.
I see. So to clarify, what happened to me was accumulation of way too much compression, not enough rest, resulted in end plate fractures, multiple end plate fractures throughout my spine, which is basically where I'm assuming you have a model to show it where, yeah, show us what an end plate fracture is.
Okay, there's the sacrum, there's the L5 vertebra, and L4, we've just sawn the top of it off. The top and bottom of the disc is not bone, it's actually cartilage. So there's some cartilage, and then you pressurize the nuclear gel tremendously with very heavy loads. So I'm just going to squeeze it down with two hands now, and the fracture in the cartilage is going to open up, and there you see the nuclear gel underneath pressurizing through. So we have other models that show that in a little bit more detail. Let's pull out the plug, and we're going to pressurize the spine. So the nuclear gel of L5 here is going to squirt through an end plate fracture into the vertebral body. And if I can align the camera right, you see, there it is coming up in, it's dyed blue, and we vacuum it back out. Now, certain people are lucky, and that end plate fracture calluses over and seals.
And does it get stronger or no?
Well, I would have, does it get as strong as it ever was if it was unfractured? I don't know the answer to that. I can tell you that it got strong enough that Brian Carroll could squat. I can give you many, many examples of very strong top level athletes that came back to be able to withstand those very, very heavy weights. But I can't answer your question. Did they get their original resilience to compression back? I don't know.
So
Yeah.
is loss of disc height inevitable with an end plate fracture?
Yes.
Yes, it is. Okay, so when the disc loses height, so is it fair to say that the thicker and fuller the disc, the more stability, the shorter the disc, the more unstable it is? Is that a fair description, or also a depending type of thing?
The answer is it depends. And the reason for that is this. We will see in certain athletes, we might measure the height of 4 discs and say one disc has been flattened and it really looks gnarly. And yet where we measure where the pain is coming from, it's not coming from that disc. It's coming from the nice, thick, plump disc up top, because that's the unstable one now, and it's time. So the first person to document this was a Professor Bill Kirkcaldy Willis. He was an orthopedic surgeon, and he wrote a book called Managing Low Back Pain. And he described what he called the degenerative cascade. And he was absolutely correct in that when you first damage a disc or an end plate, the joint now loses stiffness and it's a little bit unstable. And the symptoms are, oh, you roll over in bed and you get a sharp pain, or you bend forward and you get a sharp pain. And you might have that for several years. And then after a while, nature gristles and stiffens that. So it's a little harder to put your socks on in the morning. But those micro movements are now engineered out. So when you take an MRI, that's a gnarly looking joint with bone spurs. It's flat, but it's stable. It's gristled up. Now the joint above that is nice and plump and has lots of mobility, it's the one that now has the micro movements in it. Do you follow? So it's just entering its unstable phase. So that's why I have to hedge a little bit. It isn't always the disc that loses height. When it first loses height, yes, it's entered the unstable phase of the degenerative cascade, but you will not retire. I mean, I'm a prime example. I had joint instability when I was in my 20s and 30s. I would have sharp pains and acute episodes and whatnot. Don't have any now. I'm 65. My spine is fine. And you will hear that story over and over again with people in their 60-year-olds. They'll say, back pain. I used to have back pain in my 20s and 30s. I don't have it now. I got other problems. I've got cardiac problems. Obviously memory loss. But anyway, you get the idea. So if you play the game well, David, you won't retire this way. You might have other problems, but your back most likely won't be one of them.
Gotcha. So end plate fracture, disc loses height. Shortly after end plate fracture, that's when there's a good amount of instability. With time, nature gristles and stiffens it. But let's say you get an end plate fracture at a disc, right? And let's say the disc above it doesn't experience any direct damage. Could that healthy disc indirectly become unstable due to an end plate fracture of a disc above or below it?
Well, in a manner, not directly, but indirectly, absolutely. And here's what happens typically. This is the typical scenario. So you damage one joint and it goes into an unstable phase. And then over time, it stiffens and stabilizes. It doesn't move very much. But if you keep doing the same stupid techniques in the gym, now it migrates to the next level. And it's so interesting. We've had patients, and I've been involved in this for a long enough time now, that we will have someone with real heavy joint instability at L4. And then they go back to the gym and they still haven't learned how to lift properly and train properly. And then they come in with instability at L3. And then that is dealt with. And then they come in at L1. And you'll see this with people going into spine surgery. They'll go in and they'll have, say, a fusion done at L4, L5. 4 or 5 years later, now they're coming in for a fusion at L3. And then 4 or 5 years later, they're coming in for a fusion at L2. And I say to them, didn't the surgeon ever tell you why you need these surgeries? And you keep going layer after layer. And they say, well, no. And I said, well, all you've done is bought the surgeon another BMW. Stop, learn what is causing your, these things don't come out of thin air. If you've been injured, you've violated the rule of biology. Find out what it was and stop it.
Are there people that have their entire spine fused? Is that even a thing?
Well, yes, but maybe not for the reason that you're thinking of. There are some people that have conditions called scoliosis, for example, where they have lateral S shapes to their spine, which in mild forms don't turn into something of concern, but in more advanced forms, they do. They can't breathe. They're crushed right down, and their organs aren't functioning properly. So the surgeons who deal with this sort of thing fuse their spine from their neck to their sacrum. They put steel rods, bicycle spokes, but very heavy bicycle spokes along the full length of their spine to create a full spine fusion.
Could that paradoxically make you maybe even like stronger or more resilient for something, say like a deadlift, or no, because you need that subtle little rod
Yes,
bendy movement?
you do. Yeah, your spine is very dynamic. Now, I'm going to give you an example. When you go to bed at night, you'll find that you can take your socks off quite easily. When you get out of bed in the morning, it's a little harder to put them on, isn't it? And the reason, if you measured your height, you're about, depending on who you are, almost an inch taller when you get out of bed in the morning, a couple centimeters taller. Your spine discs suck up fluid throughout the night. They get thick and turgid. You just changed the length. Now, if you were all held together with steel rods, do you see how that's going to create an awful lot of stress because your spine is moving and changing every day and throughout the day? It's called the diurnal variation, but the spinal rods don't.
So you mentioned with scoliosis, obviously when it's severe enough to the point where you have to get it, fused straight, that's like a pretty extreme case. But in the more subtler, mild cases, even with me, when I was very young, when I was like 12, I was diagnosed with scoliosis. And I think it's because I was just growing faster than, I was growing really fast, and then I was like sit slouch on the computer. So it would just become crooked. And I think it's straightened out to a decent degree throughout weightlifting. But even now, the MRIs that I sent you prior to our initial appointment, I had like my own layman's look at it, right? And I could tell from the back there was like a subtle like curve. So is it the case where if you have a slight degree of scoliosis, it's not really that big of a deal, or can it be problematic specifically when adding compressive load? Because if the spine isn't fully straight, it just makes sense how there's like uneven distribution of stress throughout a disc.
Well, again, it depends. There are some marquee athletes, and I'm talking about athletes who've dominated their sport, and they have had cases of mild scoliosis. Now, consider a baseball player Can you imagine when you're creating a unilateral asymmetry that there are some sports where if you had a little bit more of elastic tightness on one side, a little bit more of elastic elasticity on the other, do you see how that could even be an advantage?
Mm.
Okay, so do you see there, you could argue that a slight asymmetry could be an advantage. And then you look at some of the world's fastest sprinters, some of whom have scoliosis, and they have to continually work on, say, Schroth exercises, where, say, the scoliosis is like this, and they might hold the outside of the curve, the convex side down. They breathe into the concave side, keep trying to open up that rib cage and combat the tendency to go more into their scoliosis. So there would be an example where I would say, no, they have to keep working against that scoliosis to get load resilience, and that's also speed and power resilience that involves the same load. So do you see why it's a yes and a no? And
Yeah.
my world is not generalizations, as you
Yeah.
pointed out earlier. My world is very, very specific. Let's examine this person who sits in front of us and what is their uniqueness.
When the spine becomes unstable in certain areas, does the brain limit how strong it'll allow you to be? Like, for example, on a squat per se? Because I've
Yes.
most certainly experienced that. Like, when I have like certain spinal injuries, I'll get to the point where even if I don't have that much pain for whatever reason, it's like I cannot squat as much. Like my brain is like limiting the throttle of energy output. But if I sit on a leg press, I could press exponentially more weight than I could squat. And I always found that very interesting.
Well, you just hit the nail on the head. Can you imagine someone who has a damaged knee ligament? They'll be walking and all of a sudden their knee gives way. The brain shut it down. It felt the instability. The spine is exactly the same. And people who have these instabilities, they will have an acute attack and they say, I fell and I buckled to my knees. What happened? Did I become paralyzed? No, the brain just shut down the neural drive because it detected the instability. Well, I don't know how much I can reveal here. I've got guys who are in the UFC. Do you know what that is? The fight league. Can
Mm-hmm.
you imagine knowing you have a spinal instability that could go at any minute? And now you have that added stress and you're going into the cage to fight for your life. Our job is to build resilience as much as possible to not allow that to happen. So the camps that they go through are very, very specifically designed to stop that giving way sensation where it's basically life or death. But let me offer up this evidence because it's so much fun. Go on YouTube and look at World's Strongest Man, the one that was in Mogadishu, Africa. It was maybe 3 or 4 years ago now, I've lost track. And there was an event where the lads had to put 750 pounds on a bar on their back. It was in this big jig, and they had to squat, touch the bottom platform, and squat up again. And you had to squat 750 pounds for reps. Go carefully look at those films again. And YouTube, you can go in reverse and keep watching it over and over again. Every single strongman hit the wall, but you saw it in the lift before. Their brain perceived the micro movement and the instability, and then it shut down their strength, and we knew they weren't going to get another rep. And you would see they would squat very pristinely, and then they would lose a little bit of tightness, a little bit of form, and then the hips would shift just a tiny bit, or they would round just a tiny bit. And then we knew the brain would perceive that. And there are some groups and in therapy, whatnot these days that are saying, oh, lifting form doesn't matter, just lift. Neurology would disagree when you measure it, and we've caught a few of those in our laboratory experiments over the years as well. Good form, good stabilizing tactics and motor control allow you to lift more for longer without the brain shutting down the neural drive as you're describing.
I have an interesting experience and question about that, because when I was in my late teen years, going really, really intense and heavy with the powerlifting, there would be many weeks and even months on end where I either couldn't squat or deadlift, or could, but with such a lighter weight, but still experiencing some pain and sucking up and just getting through it, right? But another thing I used when I was younger that wasn't just weightlifting was pre-workout supplements. I loved stimulants, right? And then what I noticed is, let's say I'm in a period, I'm in a phase where my back hurts really, really bad to where I can't, squat or deadlift anywhere near to what I'm capable of. There would be times where I would mega dose pre-workout. And there was this one pre-workout back in the day. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It's called Jack 3D. And it had this one ingredient in there called 1,3-dimethylamylamine, something like that. It's basically molecularly almost identical to an amphetamine, right? So it's a very, very, very powerful stimulant. And when I would take that pre-workout in high doses, just all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I'm like 100% good. I could squat and deadlift as heavy as I can. And I'm curious as to why that is. And I have two theories, and I'd be curious to hear your take on it. Theory number one is that because it's such a strong stimulant, just all the muscle fibers in my body are so pre-activated that I get a ridiculous amount of core stiffness, way more than I otherwise would. And that creates enough stability for me to be able to lift the heavy weights. Or theory number two is that because the stimulants are so strong, they're releasing so much adrenaline, putting me in a fight or flight state, that it's basically overriding my brain's limitation to how strong of an output it could send due to any instability. It just overrides that because it literally thinks it's in life or death because of how much adrenaline is being released.
Well, I don't know the answer to that specifically in a general way. But again, the thoughts that are going through my mind as I'm listening to your logic is that drugs are banned because they work. They do a lot of magical things, and there are neurological loops, and there are natural inhibitors in your body. Now, we've discussed one. When your brain perceives that joint instability in your spine, it saps your strength, it shuts down the neural drive. But that is an inhibitor. Do you know that there are inhibitors of the inhibitors? And there are inhibitors of the inhibitors of the inhibitors in the neural loops that govern the laws of your body. So it may just be that now the stimulant has inhibited the inhibitor. So now you're go again. And when you talk to the really top level neuroscientists and they start describing the inhibitors to the inhibitors and give you experimental examples, they're fascinating. So it may be simply you're inhibiting an inhibitor, but I could come up in front of you and go, boo! And you will inhibit the inhibitor with something like that.
That makes so much sense. And it's just so unfortunate that some of the heaviest lifts, some of the biggest PRs I've ever hit were in states like that. And it's just so bad, because it's like your body's not ready to lift any weights at all, really. But now you're blocking all these inhibitors and you're lifting so much more than you normally would. And it's just, in the moment, it feels great. All inhibitions blocked. I'll lift something super heavy. But it's just, the cumulative stress that's happening, the damage that you're doing without realizing it is just insane. So,
Well, my wife is a sport psychology consultant. And we've all been there, people who compete, you get into a neurological flow. And when you're in that flow state, magical things flow out of your body. And it might just simply be that as well. You know, you go to a top powerlifting meet and you will see some lifters swearing and banging their head against the wall and being slapped really violently to get into that fight or flight response. And then, you know, I look at someone, this is just to show how it always depends. You look at Bill Kazmaier, who was world's strongest man for the first 3 years. And Bill is a very, very cerebral, spiritual man. And he almost gets in, well, he describes it as a religious experience, getting ready for that feat of strength, and how he feels this wave of you know, these rays from the Lord to strengthening his body. And I've watched him as he prepares. He gets beads of sweat on his forehead. He goes goose pimply, and then I know he's ready to go. And he did all that through achieving that fight or flight temporary super strength with a very, very different approach than the person who's slamming their head against the wall, or maybe it's you know, some kind of compound.
Yeah,
It's
that's interesting.
whatever works. But you know, that look at sports psychology, how they work with the athlete to figure out for that individual, how do you ramp them up, turn them into a controlled rage to inhibit all the inhibitors, and then to sleep at night, they need a totally different psychology to wind it all down, chill. And, you know, I mean, it's fabulous.
However you get to the state, like you said, for some, through a spiritual means, they're channeling godlike strength for a particular instance to just unleash, wreak havoc on the weights. And for other people, it could be through pharmacology, using certain supplements. And, you know, different people have different avenues of like getting to that state of being when they're super capable like that. When you're in that state, are you also more resilient, or the resiliency of your body stays the same, just your capacity and lack of inhibition increases?
Yeah, I suppose it would be, what injury pathway are we talking about? You know, if it's an instability buckling pathway and you had more stiffness, and joints get more stable as you compress them. You know, think of doing an arm bar in MMA. You traction the arm and then you lock in the arm bar. So you distract the joint to make it weak. But if you're in a very tight controlled position, there's no way they can get that arm bar, because they can't create the instability that they need to lock it in. So there would be an example where, I don't know, I could argue that anything that made me tighter and stronger made me more resilient.
Yeah.
You know, and I think of collisions in football. Many collision sports, the stronger and tighter that person can get at the instant of impact, they become more resilient. So, you know, I could argue it either way.
That is very interesting. So, just winding it back a little bit, like coming back to me. So, what you were able to see in me is um, accumulated compression fractures, spine way too compressed, not enough rest, some end plate fractures, and then so with what you were saying, when there's instability, not only does the brain limit the strength output, it activates an inhibitor, but also just by the fact that there's instability and micro movements and shearing, that's damaging and irritating surrounding tendons, ligaments, joints, and nerves, right? And that's what's actually causing you to have that experience of pain. So, for my recovery process specifically, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're going to stiffen the spine. And the way that we're going to do that is have really good spine hygiene, meaning that all my day-to-day movements, laying up, sitting, standing down, moving around, I'm keeping my spine in as neutral of a fashion as possible. Because another thought that I had is like, if I'm assuming if you're trying to heal the spine, right? like for something to heal, it more or less, I'm assuming, needs to be at rest. So if your spine's always in weird positions, right, or in suboptimal positions, is it a situation where the spine kind of heals in that incorrect way? So part of rehabilitating the spine is having the spine in a correct position for a prolonged period of time, so the brain registers, oh, okay, this is the position that he wants a spine to be in, so I'm going to heal and gristle at this pattern or this shape. Is it something like that?
You may be overthinking this a little bit. I'm going to take my little finger. Let's put it at rest. There's my little finger at rest. Now, if I slept on it and bent it over into that position, I deviated it, I would wake up in the morning, most likely with more pain. So the point is, stress in a joint increases as you take it out of its neutral zone. So that's what the definition of a rested state for a joint is. So if you can put your spine into a rested state, you've de-stressed it, and you have to de-stress it to allow it to desensitize. So you said earlier, oh, the compressed joints are going to damage the nerves more. They're causing more pain. I don't know if they're damaging them or not. I could argue that yes, in some cases they will be. In many cases they won't be. In your cases, I don't think so. So get that out of your head. But have you not experienced for the first time in the last 6 weeks since I saw you, and you've been moving this way? Don't load and upset your back. Just let it settle. And has it not desensitized in pain?
For sure, like the last 6
Okay,
weeks.
that's it. It's either a yes or a no. Now let's go to some of the nerve issues. When I tested you, David, 6 weeks ago, you'll recall I would put you into a quadruped, right back down on your haunches to imitate a deep squat, and I got you to look up, and you nearly screamed. I didn't touch your back. All we did was migrate the nerves. So a little bit of nerve movement 6 weeks ago, do you remember? They were ramped right up. And I've asked you, and I've given you a technique to settle them down. We repeated that test a few hours ago. How much pain did you have?
None.
0. You've done a fabulous job. You've desensitized orthopedically, and you've desensitized neurologically. If you kept on training, you would still be the same as you were before. So we have to wind you down. And now the challenge is to start to introduce adapting stressors. And if we get it wrong, you will go back to pain. If we get it right, you will adapt robustness. So in English, it's as simple as that. In real life, it's a real art and it's a real science. Otherwise, everybody could do it. So we increased your program today, which was building more core stability. We've added some nerve migration to get the nerves to flow and move so that they don't cause pain. And the more that they move now that they're desensitized, they're even going to become more robust. It's what we want. You're headed in the right direction. I gave you some walkout push-ups. How much pain did they cause you?
None.
0. None. Did I give you a family of what we call the one-legged squat matrix? How much back pain did that cause you? 0. We're back in the game, son. So
yes, we are.
Yeah, we've already got you back squatting, but it's an art.
Yeah. Yes, it is. Well, on that note, as I slowly work my way up the recovery ladder and introduce more and more capacity and stiffness and all that good stuff, for people that are sick and tired of their cookie cutter diagnosis from their quite frankly, incompetent general health practitioner, right? If they maybe want to read some of your work, because I know you've written a book for the layman on how to, you know, roughly assess what's going on with them and get them out of pain. I believe the book is called The Back Mechanic. So if people want to see some of your stuff, if you have a website or if you have, you know, certain books or video courses that people could be interested in.
Well, I did write Back Mechanic. It's not the Back Mechanic, it's just Back Mechanic for the lay public who have back pain. The first job is to reduce the pain sensitivity. So that's quite a different enterprise. It's quite unique, and that's what you've been going through. So that book is to desensitize pain. It's not going to get you back onto the platform or into the Olympics. Once you've desensitized, now it's time to switch philosophies. And then the next book is Ultimate Back Fitness and Performance. So now it's time to rebuild, recognizing that you don't have the back you had when you were 18. So with the new reality, how can we adapt that back to reach your goals? And we show you how to document the demands of what you want. Say, I want to play recreational tennis. Okay, what does tennis demand of you that you can do pain-free? Then you list those things and you say, okay, well, can I do those? And if you can, we're done, you're there. But if you can't, we say, how can you train what you need, but you don't currently have, in a way that doesn't trigger pain, but builds you more? So that's Ultimate Back Fitness and Performance. And then I have a book I wrote for docs, which is basically all of that in much greater detail. So that's low back disorders. And then I have a book for strength athletes, which is Gift of Injury. Those who are looking for clinicians, it's all on our website. If you go to backfitpro.com, you can find clinicians, hopefully in your area, that can give you guidance on these things if you're struggling. Or if you are a clinician and you're looking for training in these approaches, we have our clinical courses that are now online, and you'll see those on the BackFit Pro website. So I guess the answer to the question, David, is go to the website and see what things are best suited to you.
Makes sense. All right. Well, I'm going to go do my big three. I'm going to go for my 10-minute walks. I'm going to do my backwards working up a hill, and I will proceed to desensitize. I just want to say, one, just thank you for, you know, making the time to work with me and tell me exactly what's going on. It's definitely helped tremendously. And thank you for doing this podcast. And yeah, is there anything, any closing thoughts or anything you have, any things that we maybe missed out when it comes to anything related to the spine that you maybe want to get out? Or
well, you know, I'm getting to know you a little bit, David, and as I've said to you several times, you and I are quite alike. More so, look at this, and this is what you're going to look like in another 50 years. but anyway, you know, the people who do things and contribute things are the people who get off their rear end and are a little bit of a warrior spirit. So good for you. Thanks for doing all that you're doing, and you'll come along. Help out a few others along the way.
that's the goal.
Yeah. So thanks what you're doing.
Thank you, Stu.